And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, it is time now to talk some shh. I don't think you guys heard me. Hold on, wait a minute. It is time to talk some shh. IT with Glenn and Tony.
Thank you, Ange.
Oh my God, that's like a wrestling intro. We just need a theme song.
A little theme song and some fireworks, maybe. A little fire blowing up everywhere, right? Got to
It
get the
sounded like
pyrotechnics
she.
involved.
It sounded like she lit some fireworks there.
I heard the fuses going for sure. Just didn't hear the explosions at the end. That's okay,
Hey,
though.
it's good to see you with all your lights.
Yes, indeed. Got the lights going and all that good stuff. I see you got your 3-camera setup going over there, looking good over there.
Yeah, I also got my Meticulous updated today. I
Nice.
also realized that C Music and Meticulous
Mhm.
don't like each other.
I believe that, sure. One wants to be in control, right?
Yeah, they totally step on each other. I had to basically reboot and turn one of them off.
Yeah, I
But
can
I
see
like
that. Well,
I like the visuals with this one.
yeah, definitely. And actually, me, I don't even have the MIDI hooked up on mine here, but I do have the layout right here. So this is the Meticulous layout that we're looking at on my side, and the C Music layout on your side. There are differences and things that I like better. On your side, I like the fact that when you hold notes, you can see the bar growing as you're holding a note. On my side, it just tells me what notes I'm holding, and they're lit up while I'm holding them, and then I let go.
Yeah, I do like that length. Like you can see how long somebody holds a
And if
little.
you do staccato, dot dot dot, yeah, you'll see the individual little bars as they rise up. Whereas on my side, all you would see is the keys flash on and off a couple times to know that you're hitting them.
Yeah, what
So
I
if you're
do
hitting
like
them,
with Meticulous, I like how it shows the chords and the staff and all that because
right?
that's actually more useful for training and
Mhm.
working with people. I wish I could hook everybody up to it so I could see what they're playing.
Yeah. And that's one thing is that what we can do is once I mean, all I have to do is get my keyboard over there, plug it into the MIDI cable, and then my Meticulous will fire up and I can just go ahead and hit. It's just right now I had my MIDI cable on the floor while I was hooking up my lights. But I can certainly get that going. But that would show us, like you said, it'll show you what chords you're hitting, or even if it's just 2 notes, it'll show you what the interval is that you're hitting.
Yeah.
So it'll tell you if it's a sixth or if it's a fifth or a flatted 2 or whatever it is.
The next thing I want to try is hooking up Melodyne into the Zoom
Mhm.
and seeing if I can get real time transcriptions.
Nice.
That way, when somebody is playing a guitar, if
Mhm.
I've got Melodyne actually analyzing it within a couple of seconds, I'm going to see, what Melodyne thinks they're playing.
Sure. And that's the other question, I guess, is how well something like a tuner would help with something like that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, actually, that's the other approach. Nectar, one of my plugins,
Mhm.
has a built-in, auto pitch
Mhm.
where it recognizes pitch in real time.
Right.
Would be another approach.
Mhm. And the other thing with that is my sense would be to try to do it on a signal that is as clean as possible, like not a dirty signal with a whole lot of effect on it and everything else. Because the cleaner the signal is, probably the easier Melodyne would have picking it up because it doesn't have as many overtones and as much garbage noise in
Oh yeah,
with
yeah.
the signal that it's trying to analyze.
Melodyne gets a little funky when there's too much distortion, too complex of a chord, or you have a chord that's still ringing out while
Mhm. Yep.
another one's playing. It does have a tough time figuring out what's going on when there's too much.
Right.
It's better. A Melodyne 5 is light years better than 4 when
Mhm.
it comes to that, but it still has a tough time with the complex stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine they've come a long way, and that I'm sure I would be impressed seeing them in action to see how well they work. It's just a question of how well it can, like, if somebody's doing doodle 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 doodle, is it picking up all of that, or is it giving you a sense of any of that? Like with a tuner, I could see it having trouble jumping between
It,
tones
it's
that
it's
quickly.
pretty good with the doodaloos as long as it's like a single note kind of solo.
Right.
If the guitarist is like doing dual notes while they're soloing, especially if they're going fast,
Mhm.
speed can confuse it too.
Right.
More so
That was the other
live.
thing. Mhm.
If you already have the track recorded and you let it render, you give it the time,
Mhm.
it'll analyze it. But if you try to do it real time, it's gonna drop stuff.
Right. Makes sense. And that's why you don't want to try to overwork it too much. You want to try to give it the easiest time you can. If I were trying to, one of the things I would try to do with something like Melodyne or auto transcription software itself would be to try to get a version of my song, written out essentially, like something that I know how to play, or I like how it goes in my head, but I've never actually put it down. If I were to play it through something like that, so I could see what the structure is, because then I could hand it to somebody who plays keys or somebody who's a singer or whatever, and I have the structure, I have the chords and the melody lines and all that written out for them, rather than it just being here's a recording. Because not everybody goes by ear. Like I prefer to go by ear, but some people would rather see it, whether it's in tab or whether it's in notation format.
Yeah, and for anybody out there who's like, I don't really know what chords I'm playing, Melodyne is your best friend, because when you do jam with somebody who thinks music notation, like Glenn said, you can record your track, give them the Melodyne notation, and you don't have to tell them that's a C to a G to an A to an F. Melodyne will.
Yeah, that would be best. Gotta love when it transcribes it for you. We were thinking about doing some with some of the songs that we have out in Pennsylvania also, just to get a version of it written out. Like we've played it a bunch of times each, but we've never really looked at it with, on paper to see what the song actually looks like, at the timing and everything written out. But if we were to put it out, the main thing would be to keep it as basic as possible for the structure, so that it's not overly complicated, especially if you're doing it for copywriting of a song. Like you just want the most basic melody line and the chord structure, and only the minimal identifying components of the song, because the less that you put, the more you can do with it later, but also the broader the protection, I would say, as far as the song itself, because the song is quite simple, so it goes like this, and if you make it more complicated, it's different.
Well, and if I was copywriting my songs and all of that, I wouldn't just want to copyright like a recording of it. I'd want the notation and everything else just to say, like, this is the song. This is the song on paper. This is the song on recording.
And again, easier to share with certain people if you do it on paper, where here's the chord stamps and here's the melody line, or here's the tab, or here's a recording of it. All depends on how you want to go about it.
Yeah. And again, you don't have to know any music theory these days to have it notate for you.
Yep. You can have it do it for you. And even in some cases, what were we looking at the other day? Hook theory. Hook theory was one of those where you don't even need to know the music theory to do actual chord progressions. Like you can have the beginning of a chord progression where you like from this chord to this chord to this chord, but you don't know where to go from there. And you can go to somewhere like hook theory, and it'll give you all these suggestions of places where you could go. And they say, like, most songs, 30% of songs go to this key next, and 20% of songs go to this key next, but only 2% of songs go to this key next. And so you can.
Yeah. I would love to see those actual ratios, because
it's fascinating.
Like the reason why 70% of them are going to use a certain progression is because it's the the golden goose progression. You can't go wrong with those chords, no matter what key you're in. And they just tend to be the most commercially popular progressions in songs.
Yeah, if you look at a 1-5-6-4, for example, you'll find that in so many places. And if you were to look at the actual percentages of how many songs start out 1-5-6, and then where do they go from there?
Yes. That 4 does make it nice. The 4 is the twist there. The 1-5-6, that buildup is very common.
Most definitely. And you can do it the other way too. You can switch those chords around. You can start with the 6. You can start with the 4. You can change how you do that progression, but how if you have those chords in mind already, just trying them in a different order, like even trying them just shifted, instead of 1-5-6-4, if you did 6-4-1-5, that's where you're just starting basically in the middle of the progression, but you see how it feels different as it comes around.
The 4.
How different does that feel from 6-4-5-1?
This one feels like more resolution, because starting with the 4, you want some resolution somewhere. So like, that C really resolves.
That's really home base.
When you start with the 4, you really appreciate that one.
Exactly. And again, with the if you did the 6 first and then the 4 and then the 1 and then the 5.
Oh, well, see, now that leaves you kind of like you want more.
Because it puts that 5, 6 into that first and second, or last and first chord slots.
Yeah, and the 5 doesn't really feel like it needs resolution. Like, you know, the G doesn't feel like it has to go to a 1. I mean, it can, and it does sound good. You know, the 5-1 combination always sounds resolved.
Exactly.
But with the 5, you can easily jump up to the 6 because it always feels like
a little rise there.
You're going in a up direction.
Yep. It almost feels like a hopeful lift going up like that. Same thing. You can come from the, you know, the 3 to the 4 to the 5 to the 6. You can come up like a pattern like that. That's always a good one. Doesn't feel like it resolves, and then if you're coming back to the 3, it still feels kind of unresolved.
The 6 almost feels like a hanging resolve. Like, you know, it's like, I'm not resolving, but I'm gonna hang here for a second.
Yep, because that is the relative minor of the 1. So 6 being, you know, like in this, if you were playing A minor there, that would be the relative of C major. So it feels sort of like home bass.
And I
2 of the 3 notes are the same.
At that point, you could switch to A minor, so it'd be like.
Nice.
And good now I'm in minor. Technically.
And there you can go back and forth. And that's the other thing, is you can mix back and forth between major and minor, doing, you know, within a song or even within sections of a song. A lot of times it's good to have it in different sections. So the one section may be based in major, and then another section of the song will be based in minor, and you get a totally different feel going from one to the other.
And where you want your mood in your song to go, you know. I bounce between major and minor almost religiously.
Absolutely.
It's a big part of, you know, my songwriting style.
And I know we've talked about it on.
If I start in major, then my chorus is in minor. If I start in minor, then my chorus is in major.
Yep. And we have talked about the fact that just because it's major doesn't mean it's happy versus sad, and just because it's minor doesn't mean it's sad versus happy. It's just the way it worked out in that particular example, rather than it being, you know, like I said, you know, I can have Cousin Jeff play me happy minor stuff or sad major stuff all day. And it's just one of those things. A lot
of times, especially with guys like Jeff, it's in the bounce.
Yeah.
It's in the slight chord variations, the choices in your middle notes is the difference between a happy C major and a melodic C major.
Yeah. And also modifications. You can use, you know, like we said before, you know, it could be a flat 6 or it could be a sharp 4. Like adding things like that into the mix also change things entirely. And that's where, for me, trying to get into that stuff, rather than trying to go into it from a formula approach, I would kind of go into that one with just trying the notes, like knowing, like I know what the notes of a major scale are, I know what the notes of a minor scale are, so I can start with those, and then just as I'm exploring the scale, I'll allow myself to hit what are, you know, technically wrong notes, things that are
like in a C major, a flat 6 would be the G sharp.
Yep, the A flat. Yep. Now, that almost sounds like the Worms track. It's got that little half step action in there.
It's really close, actually.
Yep.
Versus like the regular 6 on C major would be, which really feels flat to me.
Now with the 6, you usually would hit the 1, the 3, and the 6, right? You're leaving out the 5.
Yeah, I'm doing the 1, 3, 6.
Okay, cool. And it does sound weird, right? The 1, 3, 6 is kind of like, if you're looking at it, that's an inversion.
It doesn't feel like C major at that point.
Well, it's an inversion of A minor. If you're on just the A, it's you know, the C, the E, and the A give you that A minor inverted chord feel.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. If I do the A on the bass.
And it's definitely got that tension in there with the flat.
Yeah.
And then things like a flat 2, for example, that the D flat,
That
if that were in
one's-
there somewhere. You don't usually
flat
play that with the
2
1.
is
Either
like-
that or I would put it up as a flat 9. I'd put it up at the next octave.
That's
So
the
play the
stuff
C
out
at the
of
bottom.
horror movies.
Like C at the bottom and the D flat up an octave.
Oh. And you see how that can lend itself to like a horror movie, like the killer's coming.
And that top note wants to resolve down that half step. So if you
Oh,
hit that
yeah.
one and then you come down to that C.
Yeah, it definitely wants to go down. If you go up, you're gonna feel like you're not done.
Or you'd want to bring the entire chord up with you. Like that would be a way of moving the whole thing up. And then explore from there. But same idea where there's, there are notes that were not in the bass scale that you wouldn't necessarily have considered to use in a song, and just understanding that it is allowed. You can do these things, and it's, it gets out of the box of major or minor by itself. And in a lot of cases, it would be something different, like whether it's a harmonic minor versus a natural minor, and there's certain nuances that'll be different, or if it's an augmented with the sharp 5, or, you doing these fancy things. But again, rather than looking at those, starting from the theory and then trying them out, I would just try exploration like what we're doing right here. You feel what the progression or the chord that you're playing feels like. You get kind of comfy in there, and then you feel how this interval, whichever one, you just pick one. And one of the intervals that's not in the scale, where if you're playing C major, it would be one of the black notes. And it doesn't matter which, because all of them are outside the scale. So you just pick one of those black notes and see how it feels in what you're doing, and which notes feel good with it and which ones don't.
That's why it's not a bad idea once in a while to use that dice approach. And, just say, okay, we're not going to worry about 7th chords, but 1 through 6, roll the dice, play off of it.
Yep. And you can also just roll. That was the other thing, is if you roll 2 of those, 2 D6, and you end up with a number from 1 to 12 or from 2 to 12. So you just say, okay, that would be the key that you started.
You got the whole scale.
So you get your starting, or you get your starting key. So you could start anywhere from C all the way up to B. And that's 12 tones.
I hadn't even thought of that. So first roll, I establish my key with 2 dice.
Yep.
Second roll, I establish how many chords I'm going to play in the progression. There's 6, so it's possibly a 6 chord progression or less.
And we're going to say no ones though, right? Unless we're interested in doing some funk, because you can do funk in E all day. I mean, there are certain styles of music that you can get away with 1 chord all day.
Oh yeah,
but it depends.
that's my other music approach. Sometimes just bouncing on an E.
But then we had the other one where I rolled 5 dice and we got 4, 4, 4, 4, 6, and it's like, okay, well, that's not a terribly interesting progression, but it's something that could work.
Certainly work with that.
It's got those couple in there. We got some people in the chat there. We got Teddy and Julia. Hello, guys. Severed and Angie and Eden. People all hanging out. Kawaii Angel. We got Bishop Caps. Everybody hanging out on a Thursday. Loving the layout over there with the 3 cameras and the C music. I do like the C music look on that side, and we should see about the bottom there and see about getting, whether it's live down camera on the hands or how we'll figure something out for that.
I actually was looking earlier, now that I can load web pages again. I went to see what the benefits of upgrading. It's a little pricey. I mean, if I want to go it's a subscription based price, and I hate software that does that, but $100 a year. If I can get it to look like the guy that you showed me that was streaming, and the way he was using it on his keyboard and actually getting it to light up off his keyboards.
Yep.
If I can figure out first how to do that.
Well, I do know of a couple ways
my machine can handle it.
There's a couple ways that we could accomplish it.
It's worth upgrading.
One way is the same way that we're using, OBS to have, your camera views there and that on the bottom. If we were to just take and kind of crop from the bottom right to where the keys stop, the very top of those keys, and just have your camera view, as long as we have the camera in the right place and at the right aspect ratio, I guess, where the keys are all lined up right. So, because where you're going to hit the key, you'll still see it in that area that says C music, right?
Yeah, and the way he had it angled, I mean, it was off
Right.
to the side and slanted.
Yeah, he had the
I
whole
mean,
thing diagonal.
I could mount a camera like right above and get an overhead. I still actually have two more of that.
Mhm. For me, the way to do it would be things like a mic stand, like a boom mic stand, like I have for this microphone right here. I could hang a camera off of this, kind of have it like it would be if it was on the neck of a guitar or a neck of a bass, and kind of have it overhead, or I could have it hanging from my light bar overhead is the other way to for me to get the same kind of thing happening.
Now,
Because
I wouldn't be surprised if guitarists are playing around with these effects.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine you're playing on your neck and it's lighting up and having fireworks on the neck. That would actually be really cool.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of those things where probably the connection or the triggering is the tricky part there. But it could probably be triggered, like you said, through Melodyne or through some combination of Melodyne and converting to MIDI and having that trigger lights
Worst
or what have you.
case, I forgot what the name of the plugin is, but there's several VSTs that do MIDI translation from a guitar.
Right.
And
that's what I haven't looked into yet.
It wouldn't be instant graphics.
Mhm.
They'd be like a second off, but at the same time, when you're looking at splashy graphics like this, when you're looking at it, the effect is the same.
Right.
You don't really notice that it's like the time from when I hit the key to the time that it comes up.
Now, one thing that we can fix that, not for the live, but for doing things like for video for later, we can sync that up. We can take the audio and the video and just slide to get those to match up better. But that is one thing that wouldn't necessarily help live unless you were to do it, setting it with like a latency delay on it, where it's putting an actual delay on what it's showing so that what you're playing actually catches up to what it is in real time.
And
there
is actually in the C music settings, there is a MIDI latency adjuster that you can tweak so that if you got like 0.25 milliseconds difference between the note and the graphic, it will slide the graphic or the note at 0.25 milliseconds.
Yep. And that's one thing that, how much would that mess you up if you were playing and what you were hearing? If you're monitoring through there, you'd be hearing it that quarter second later. But
it doesn't affect, if you do it on the graphic, it doesn't affect the sound. The sound still sounds the way it does to you.
And what people will see should be lined up.
Yeah, it just forces the graphic to actually play at a different offset.
Yeah, so we can play with that at some point and see if that helps with getting them lined up the way they should be. And they're pretty close as it is already, which is good. People get the idea of what you're playing, and you can see that it's just
this
reacting.
This one should be fast. My keyboard is USB MIDI, which is very fast. If I used my M Audio MIDI interface, it's a little slower because it's an old school MIDI interface. So all the MIDI has to go into it, and then it goes out through a USB to the computer. So there's 2 points of travel. Whereas with my Roland, it's straight from the keyboard, straight into the computer, right through the USB. There's 0 millisecond latency.
Yeah, nice. It's a good setup.
Today's music equipment, for anybody who's shopping around, get USB 3. You should never have latency problems. You shouldn't have bandwidth problems. There's more than enough pipe on USB 3 to do many, many tracks.
Yeah, I think the one I was using before was the Carbon C61. It's the white one that's over there, and then the white one that's over here, that one, and then the black one that's over on this side is the.
Oh, you got 2 boards behind you, huh? I'm jealous.
Yeah, well, and one in front of me. The actual piano is where I'm.
I have 4 to my right.
My computer keyboard and my mouse are on there. That's the Casio CTK 611.
And it's nice to have one of those like with the built-in speakers and that can run off batteries just to go jam like wherever. I still have a Yamaha that I won't get rid of just for that convenience.
That one also has the actual the pads, the 6 little pads or 5.
Oh, it's got the drum pads?
6 little drum pads on it. Yeah. They feel like they're not quite the ones that you have, like the ones that have the big square pads that are like 2 inches by 2 inches on the actual each pad. So it's like a big surface area for you to hit. These are more like little buttons, so they're more. You have to be a little more accurate. So like trying to hit with both hands, for example, on
But
one.
the pads are designed for your fingers.
Yeah, they're designed for the finger bounce.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Some of them they had some of them where they came out. They had drum pad, you know, the little round ones on the keyboard, and you could actually play with drumsticks on them.
With these, I could see trying that.
It's a little quirky. I think if you are a drummer, you don't like hitting those kinds of pads.
Well,
but for
in this
somebody
case, you
who's a keyboardist and just wants that effect,
they would hate that. Trying to hit those buttons with sticks would suck because they're about the size of a computer keyboard key.
Yeah.
So, and they're really close together. So like if you were trying with sticks to try to hit the little buttons, it would be very difficult. Well, so it is really just for fingers.
You know those drummers though, they're all about precision. I bet you
there's precision and there's trying to hit a
you give it to a
half
Neil
inch by
Peart,
1 inch button.
And Neil Peart will hit it right in the center of the circle.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Are you going to hit it like 16 times per measure on that same little button? He would. He would. But he could do it with one hand. Just but yeah, that's one of those things, and you would probably be more likely to set it up as a you program it in or essentially do a part and then have that on repeat or loop, and then do another part and put that on loop. So doing layer by layer. Like a lot of times I'll do that as the kick drum and the snare as a layer, and I'll do all the hi-hat stuff as a layer, and then I'll do everything that's accents and crashes and things like that as a layer, or tom rolls or whatever.
That's the better approach, especially if you're not like a traditional drummer who can do all the parts at once. Thinking of the drums in layers like that helps. For like me, I have a hard time just understanding drum structure. So grasping the bass and the snare is still a challenge for me.
Yeah, and for me, by breaking it in layers like that, it might be even better to break the kick and the snare into two separate layers because of this thought, which is each one is on its own channel, so each can have its own signal path, its own volume, its own reverb. You can really customize all that stuff, because sometimes you would want to have a specific reverb for a snare versus the rest of the kit. Even with the reverbs that you have on vocals and other instruments to try to get everything in the same room, you might still want to have a separate snare reverb specifically for that crack. If in some cases you want to do that, not all the time.
Every once in a while, you might actually want to change the sound of the snare, just for a different part. Like I want this kind of snare on the verses. I want this kind of snare on the choruses.
Yeah, it could be a rock snare versus a metal snare, whatever. Like each, just you got to listen to all the samples and see what it is that really jumps out at you for that song. Yeah, and that's where also being open to hearing those changes or differences.
Yeah, the beauty with MIDI, especially drum MIDI, drums are designated for channel 10 with MIDI, and there's two types of MIDI. There's MIDI 0 and MIDI 1. MIDI 0 is the typical, I think it's MIDI 0, is the typical MIDI you see out there, where each instrument track, channel 1 is on its own, channel 2 is on its own. MIDI 1 is basically, it puts all the MIDI on a single track and everything's mashed together. When it comes to drums, there's a benefit to both MIDI 0 and MIDI 1, because when you're programming the drums, it's nice to keep them separate and get all your stuff laid out, put things where you want, get them to sound the way you want. And then when you're done, export that drum MIDI into a MIDI 0 where it's all on one nice channel 10. And it's easier to manage when you're working with other instruments. But I do prefer to have my MIDI drums actually on their own separate tracks.
Broken out, yeah. And as you said, even just for being able to individually level them and or change the individual sounds that you're using for that piece. Yep. It just makes so much sense to do it that way. But you also have some places you have limitations of tracks.
As you're putting together that beat and you're trying to get the fills and the little nuances, it's easier to clean things up when they're color coded, they're on their own, line. And I like the way BandLab actually does that when you're doing it through their programming, the way they show like each drum instrument on its own line and own color. That helps. It
shows it looping around for you. Yep. I like the way it does that.
Yeah, I really
kind of the piano roll style.
I wish they would incorporate the circular grid.
Right. We talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, like the software we were looking at last year.
That made so much sense.
Yeah, that's a fantastic grid. If I was going to program, The only program that I've seen for drums that has that option is Groove Agent.
Nice. I didn't realize I hadn't checked out Groove that much. We talked about it previously, and I think we looked at it in one of our programs, but I don't remember going back and really diving into it too much.
Yeah, it's got two types of views. You can view it linear, sequential left to right, or you can switch to the looping view, and it treats it more circular.
Makes sense.
And then you start thinking of it like, in like clock fashion, like
right,
bump, 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 and you
and
see
linearly
the clock go around.
And with the linear one, it's harder to see or feel when the one's coming back around because it's like what?
Yeah, and with the linear one, like
back.
It's like reading a book. You're constantly going back left to right through each loop.
Yep, but you get that whole clock feel going around that way for sure.
Yeah, that works much better for time-based thinking.
Yeah, I liked it. And that was one that, again, where when I stumbled on that, it was years ago, and it was I think it was his doctoral thesis paper that he was presenting.
Yeah, he was studying like different types of drum styles and the differences between like a bossa nova and a rumba.
Yep. The differences and the similarities in when you lay them out in that same circular pattern. It kind of gives you the breakdown. Okay, you see, this is the same as this one, but everything is just shifted one tone over or one spot over.
It was much easier to actually see the similarities between those styles when you are looking at them circular. If I'd been looking at that through traditional grids, you don't really see the similarities because the linear approach kind of throws off your brain a little. But in the circular approach, you really see like where things, you see the 2 o'clock, you see the 4 o'clock, you see the 6 o'clock.
Yep. And with the linear, it feels like it throws off, like we were saying, you can tell the complexity. Like you'd see, okay, this one's more complex than this one. And you can see that this one is different than that one. But seeing in what way they're different or in what way they're the same is much easier to compare on that circular grid. I agree.
Yeah, and a lot of the complexity you see in the center of the circle because, the way that they layered the instruments, you've got your most simplest of instruments on the outside circle and then the snare and the hi-hats. And as you go further into the circle, all those things that are doing complex hits and other things are in the center of the circle, whereas the bass and the snare are on the outside. And that's where you see the similarities between certain beats. It's like, the bass and the snare are doing the same thing in this style that they are in that style.
Yeah. And they, in this way also, by laying it out in a circle, if you want that same 16 part breakdown as you would normally have, that's 4 parts per quarter. So if you're looking at that top right quarter, you can easily see it's broken down to 1, 2, 3, 4. So each quarter of the circle is broken down into those 4 little parts, and you can see again the similarities and differences between the 2 different or whatever styles of music you're comparing. And like I said, in the middle, the bell patterns, like the inside, the center of the cymbals, where you get that higher ting, ting ting on the one and tong tong on the other, and you get the patterns going back and forth there, and that's where you get some of those more complex.
Oh yeah, the rides and the beats. Crashes, all the cymbal stuff is like close to the center,
hanging out up in the middle, make easier what's going on. Rello says he likes that picture in the background. Thank you. That is the Pink Floyd back catalog, which is 7 different Pink Floyd albums, or the cover art, I should say, from 7 different Pink Floyd albums.
I've had that picture burned in my brain for a year now.
Yeah, I actually got that.
There was a time that's what I thought you looked like.
Yeah, exactly, because that was my background for a while. That was all I had as an image because I didn't have a camera going yet. But I got that at least 15 or 20 years ago by now.
Then he went out and bought 3 cameras.
Then I went out and bought 3 cameras. I've got this one over here. I've got the one that's not on right now, but it's over there. Actually, it looks like it's on. It thinks it's on, but it's looking at a cardboard box. Let's see what that looks like. I think it's just looking at nothing at all. Yeah, see? It's looking at a cardboard box, like this spot over here.
Wow, that's pretty good for a macro.
Yeah.
Like your finger was sharp there.
Sharp finger, no. But we have those, and we had the other layout that we had at one point, which was let's see, was it this one? Yeah, it's probably like that, where we had that one over there and this graphics. One over here. But that was more
goes
for
with the AI graphics a little.
Yeah. And when we did the Yahtzee, I could put one of the dice there, so we could see the die roll. But that is really close. I'd have to figure out a way to back that view up a little bit in order to see that more clearly. But this one, it's like when I do this one, I can do a little bit of the other. That's all right. I don't mind. It'll be fine. Turn those off like that. But I like being able to go back and forth. So this one's good though for when I'm doing the piano stuff. I can talk about what key it's in. I can be hitting the keys. I have to hook up the MIDI. I'll do that before we get to the second half of the program, because as we all know, we have the dads coming up in about 20 minutes, and then after the dads, Tony and I come back. We'll do some more talking, and before we get that going, I'll get the other keyboard hooked up over here.
Yeah, and that's the layout that I really think is good for training and instructional.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm going to do any lessons or I'm going to get any lessons, that's the kind of view I would want to be teaching or learning with.
Right.
At least what I was doing. The nice thing with Meticulous, it supports different kinds of views. So you can set it up to display a guitar, a bass, a keyboard. Don't know if
what's interesting,
any other ones, but
the translation is what's interesting though, because if you do, for example, if you're playing on a keyboard as the input and you tell it to show guitar, it probably, my guess would be that it wouldn't translate it quite the same way, just because when you're playing, C major on a keyboard, you're probably playing C, E, G all in one spot.
Yeah, I did notice that when I was setting it to the guitar tab, some of my chords, because of the way a guitar is formed, some of them, there'd be notes missing.
Yep. And in some cases, if you wanted to see, for example, what one of the big standard bar chords, like the E-shaped bar chord, is the big 6-string bar chord, where if you were playing at the 5th fret, for example, you'd be playing 5, 7, 7, 6, 5, 5 for the pattern that you're using down the neck there. If you were to put that in on a keyboard, you'd be doing root, 5th, root. So like the low half of the chord, you're going like C, G, C, and then you're going with the 3rd and the 5th and the root in the top. So if you were to play the chord out in that kind of way, so you were doing C, G, C, and then an E and a C and a G, or sorry, an E and a G and a C. So you want the root, the lowest note and the highest note would be the root in this case, and the octave in between them would be in there as well, or the octave closest to the lowest note. That's going to be an octave away, because the bottom 3 notes are going to be root, 5, root, and the top 3 are going to be the 3, 5, root. For that same concept. And if you were to look at that, then playing it that way, and then looking at how it looked with a guitar neck, you would probably see it highlighted the way you would expect it, which would be the that 6-string E-shape bar chord.
And you guys have those open strings that are playing something when you strum them.
Well, in this case, no. This is one, by calling it that 6-string bar chord, is the movable one, where you can put it anywhere on the neck, and wherever you're moving it, like in this case, we were doing 5, 7, 7, 6, 5, 5.
And you're actually doing something like that?
You're playing everything all together. So it would be those notes that you just hit. Exactly. If you were to play that chord to Meticulous while showing the guitar neck, it would probably show you that bar chord, because that would be the right spacing of the notes and the right order of the notes, lowest to highest. It could be a little further apart, like it might be the C, G, C, and then jump a little bit, but it's probably all in that range. Because the overall
does work good all the way up.
The overall bottom to top is 2 octaves. So you're hitting, the lowest octave, the middle one, and the highest one. Those 3 notes are in there, and the other 3 notes are going to be a 5 low, and then a 3, and then a 5. And it gives that nice full sound. The other thing that's nice on piano is that you can separate those even further if you wanted to, where a lot of times you'd be hitting in the left hand.
Hands are only so big.
Well, no, I mean, in the left hand, you could be hitting C, G, C in this octave, and then you could skip an octave or 2, and you're playing the right hand up there with a 3 and a 5 and a root at the top. That way you're playing the same chord, but you're getting more space, where you're hitting, you're hitting low notes and high notes and covering that whole ground.
It does sound nice when it's spread out like that.
Big commanding chords.
Yeah.
I like it. And a lot of times, like as you're getting up to the 6 there, like as you're coming up from the 1 and you work your way all the way to the 6, we don't like that 7, but we can go up to that 6, back to the 5, and then up to the 1.
Well, it doesn't sound so bad when you play it spread out like that. Listening to that it's still still a little sharper than the rest of them, but it
Because
does
that one
make
technically should be diminished if we're playing it that way. But
it does make you happy to get back to that C.
right. We usually go with the flat 3 or the flat 5. Loves getting home. Nice. And that's where, again, when it comes to progressions, just let yourself kind of explore those kinds of things, feel where it takes you. And a lot of times going sequentially from this chord to the next chord, but understanding how the home key that you're in, whether you're playing in G major or G mixolydian, makes a difference, because there's a different chord that you're going to be playing in there if you're playing one versus the other.
And that's where it's flat to 4.
For the mixolydian, usually you would flat to 7. So you would go like, in the case of G mixolydian, what's nice about it is G mixolydian only has G major only has the one sharp, right? Which is that F.
That F sharp.
So if we flat to 7, we're telling it to not sharpen the F. So we're saying we're going to use the F natural. So now it's just the same notes as C major, but starting from G and ending on G, because G mixolydian is related to C major or C Ionian because it's the 5th chord in the progression, or it's the scale that we build off the 5th degree of the chord.
It does sound off though with the flatted 7.
It sounds a little off, but it depends what you're playing it with, and that's where, if you were playing a song where it's highlighting that particular sound,
well,
is where
I
it makes a difference.
I could see using the flat 7th if I was like soloing.
Mm-hmm.
If I was on my right hand, I could see using it. Mm-hmm. With my left hand,
at the same time, a lot of times you're not usually playing 7s in your left hand, right? Your left hand, a lot of times you're focused on the root and the 5th. So like the 7th is more stuff that you're playing. I mean, not always, but the 7th is a lot of times the stuff that you're doing with the right.
I can't recall any times I've actually played a 7th on my left hand. I'm trying to think of one.
What it's good for, though, I'll tell you, is the bounce that we do in the bass all the time. Like if I'm playing in C, for example, bouncing from that C to the B flat and back to the C in the low end. That's what I'll be doing on a bass a lot of times, going to the note that is two half steps behind the root, whatever key I'm playing in, just to get that little bit of a bounce, a little bit of motion. Yeah. Because that's the flat 7 there. Gives a little bit of movement without giving a lot of movement. You're not getting away from the home key, but you're just adding just that little departure and then coming right back.
The B flat does sound nice with the C. Like,
yeah.
C, if I go to the traditional B, always makes me feel like
because you're going to that 7.
Old school rock and roll. But
that B feels like the 7.
B flat.
B flat feels.
It's like ooh.
Party time.
And it does lend itself to going down to A major at that point.
Just like that.
I could work with that.
Yep.
That's some soundtrack shit.
Hell yeah. It's got a good sound to it. And again, that's just one note. Like, and with me, with discovering bass lines, or with coming up with bass lines, generating bass lines, starting from a very simple position of starting with the root and playing with the 5 and or the octave, getting started to figure my way into something, to get a pattern going, whether it's bouncing back and forth between a root and an octave and a root and a 5th or whatever, or the 5th above and then the 5th below. If you're focusing on that C and you're going C, 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 and you play the G above, the G below, and then back to that C, because again, you did movement, but you really didn't go anywhere. So things like that can generate movement and or interest in the lines that you're playing in the low end there. But a lot of times the bass does. I mean, some people, they'll just sit on that root 5 and just hit the root and the 5 in that left hand all week. Bless you. They'll hit that root 5 in the left hand.
I muted.
That's how good my ears are. Heard it through the mute. But yeah, it's just, some people, they'll just stick with that root 5 in the left. But even just doing root 5 root in the left and then something else in the right can make it more interesting. But one of the ones that I had seen for a spread voicing, they were calling it, would be doing like the root 5 root in the left hand, and then with the right hand a little bit further up, like an octave higher, going with the 7 as the lowest note and the 3rd as the high note. So it's just doing like a dyad in each hand, but by doing like a C and a G in this hand and a B and an E in that hand, you're getting spread between them there.
I'm doing off a G, but seventh
Yep.
and
For a G major, you'd be doing with the like the F sharp and the
I've got
B.
third on the B and the F sharp
and
is the
F
seventh,
sharp.
right?
Yep. And it's nice because you can spread those out like that, where you have
It's got kind of a jazzy, not a jazz, a little bit jazzy.
a little bit. Partly also because you can bounce the low notes, like if you go from that low 1 to the 2 that are right above it, bounce those back and forth a little, or bounce between the upper 2. You know, you get little bounces that make different movement, basically, with what you're doing.
Yeah, it goes nice to the 5.
Yeah. And you can go back and forth between those all day.
Yeah. So that's the secret to that sound.
Yep. And there's only so many different combinations, so we can explore each of those, you know, the 1 to the 5, explore the 1 to the 4, and see how that feels, you know, if you went to one below that.
Oh, I'm going to play with that
Mm-hmm.
while we watch that.
Exactly. And that's the thing.
That's a new one. That's a new one for me.
1 to the 5. And that's where, again, with if you did
with that 7th and 3rd,
right,
that's what's new. It gives it such a, I mean, it feels unresolved, but at the same time it's pretty.
and that's the way that you're playing full 4-note chords now too. So now that you're adding those 7ths in, they don't always work, but sometimes you want to use the 7. Sometimes the 7 will feel sharp and you'll want to flatten it, so that'll be more that Mixolydian sound we were talking about, where you're flattening the 7. Could be Mixolydian or could be others that use a flattened 7 sound.
I think I found some of the secret to Lady Piano's approach.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
she does stuff like that all the time.
It's just a great back and forth.
Oh, ideas.
Now, one thing I like also is taking something like that 1-5 back and forth, and then if you move up a whole step with it, now you're going back and forth with the 2 and the 6, and you do a minor. So if you do the minor 2 and the minor, like if that was C and G, for example, going back and forth, then this would be going D minor to A minor, back and forth. And even putting all 4 of those together as a kind of a 1-5-2-6 thing. Or 6, 2-6-1-5 is the other way to do it, where you start with that D minor, A minor.
I was doing D major. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 1, 2, 6.
Well, in this case, we're thinking about if we're going the D minor to the A minor, that'd be like a 2 to a 6. And if we can use all 4 of those chords, use the D minor, the A minor, the C major, and the G major, and you can kind of mix those around any which way.
Oh, yeah.
I like that it starts with that minor saddish kind of.
I know the C almost seems out of place there, but it falls nice to the G. Like, of course, the C to the G is always going to resolve beautifully. Mm-hmm. But starting with that 2 really does lead to a moodier.
It is a great feel.
Yeah,
and again, I love the back and forth between the majors and minors.
And you almost feel like you're in major.
What about reversing it? What about doing the 1-5 first and then the 2-6?
Oh yeah, it works just as good.
When it gets to the minor part, it's almost wistful instead this way.
A lot of potential to go in many directions with that kind of progression.
Exactly. And that's why that is one of the most common. Like if you ever look at any list of the most common chord progressions, you're going to find that on there. You're going to find the one that we talked about earlier, the 1-5-6-4. That's a very common one. You'll find 2-6-1-5. It also depends on what style of music you're talking about, because in jazz, you'll find 2-5-1s, turnarounds all over the place.
I was going to say, I'm trying to think of where in classical music I can relate that progression to. And I know I've heard it in classical music. I just can't pinpoint like any particular piece.
You're right, though. You would find tons of examples, though. And it wouldn't just necessarily be one person, but there are, I'm sure, some composers who their style is more based around that. But
yeah,
I wouldn't be able to pinpoint it either without hearing some examples.
I don't always hear the sure in the composition when I'm listening to the whole orchestra like that. But with modern like music, I can tell the difference between a guitar and a drum and a bass and you know, the vocals, and you hear the progressions and where they're moving a lot more obvious.
I think that's one of the things that my dad was more drawn to, the solo piano classical pieces, or the arranging of classical pieces in just solo for piano, because he was focused in piano, so he wanted to be able to hear very clearly what was going on. So just one person playing a piano at one time is much easier to you know, feel the arrangement, see how it feels as one person
to
playing.
Understand the arrangement.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
To really see the structure of it.
Not that all music has to be just piano, but just as far as for him to understand and digest and be able to reproduce a song, it was important to see it in that context.
Yeah.
But he could also just do it right from the sheet music as well. He could just, you know, sight read and play it as if he's been playing it for years. So that was one.
He would have had to learn Chopin.
Yeah. And he did that for many, many years. I think Andy's going to be jumping in any minute. 2 minutes about.
2-minute warning.
2-minute warning.
It's like a hockey game.
There you go.
Getting put in the penalty box. It's kind
You
of
have been warned.
It's
Highly educational.
Been warned. You've been
2-minute warning before we get to see from you, Dad, me, and Hello, the top family movies.
Nice.
Oh, top family movies.
Family
tonight,
movies.
Ah. And then you gotta make sure to come back so we can talk more IT with Glenn and Tony.
And I promise to get more coffee before then.
Yay!
Because I need some for sure.
Then heading down home stretch of Thursday night into Friday, we have electronic with Soul Make after that. You guys aren't ever fucking sleeping again.
Never.
I'm
sleep
taking
when
my
I'm
eyelids
dead.
open.
We got the toothpicks over there to keep the eyelids open, right?
That's right.
Prop them right in
I'm
there.
just gonna draw eyes on my eyelids.
I could just draw it on the top of my head. Draw a little face up there. What about the 3-4-5-6 progression there, like from E minor? I always like ones that have a climb like that, where they just work their way up.
Gotta
Nice. Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't resolve on a 3.
No, but you found that one. That's where it goes. Very cool. That's where you can feel it, right? You feel it pulling there. So it's like, yeah, we got to go over there.
Oh yeah. That's the first thing I did understand with my music theory, when my teachers were emphasizing the importance of resolution. If you don't learn anything else with music theory, do understand why resolution really matters. Otherwise, you will write songs that people might not like because you constantly keep them hanging where their ears want resolution.
You can also call that tension and release, and you need them in a pair. You got to be able to release that tension.
When you don't use the resolution, then you need to know what the effect is, because sometimes tension and that holding is effective, but you don't want to write a horror soundtrack to a love movie unless it's one of those like really scary relationships.
Oh yeah.
And here we go. Thanks for going ahead.
See you in a bit.
See y'all in a bit.